Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all right and doing okay. Not too disappointed by the results of what the Prime Minister had to say to us on Monday, which we perfectly understand. It just means we have to have a little readjustment till we can get everything up and running. But never mind, saving people's lives is what matters. So I hope you're not too disappointed. And we can have things that we're having at the moment. So things like fun days in Old Shilton and some affairs here and various other things. So that's good. Now in April 2018, after due research and a lot of personal experience, Spand published a book called Still the Same People. And much of what I'm going to talk to you about today and next week is to be found in it. The title came from the words of one of the songs from the Balm of Mercy, which describe what happens when two elderly people develop dementia. Just going to read the words of the song to you now. Will they still love us now that we're frail and more feeble? Inside, we're still the same people. It's just that we're old. Relatives disappear. They only come when there's something to get. The rest of the time, they so easily forget our hidden fears. Every day now we're forgetting things we instinctively knew, angry, frustrated, regretting. Someday it might be you. Please take pity. Please have mercy. Will anyone still be kind when things begin to really unwind? When it seems that we are losing our minds, who will be there? Slowly withdrawing in silence into our own private life, not recognizing each other. Once we were man and wife. Please take pity. Please have mercy. Remember me. Last week I was telling you about my experience of working with people with dementia, which began actually 35 years ago, but which had changed dramatically in the last few years for two reasons. First of all, the rapid increase in the number of people developing the condition in our own parishes here, and the fact that they were all people whom I had known personally before this happened, whereas before there were people like patients in hospitals that I'd never met. And so we're now dealing with people that we've known before they developed the condition, most notably, of course, Father Terry, and the two lovely ladies who used to clean my house, Pat Woodley, to whom the book is dedicated, and her sister Betty Orton. And there can be no doubt that this is the greatest challenge facing the Church in our pastoral work at the beginning of the 21st century, the advent and rapid increase in the numbers of people presenting with dementia. There are 900,000 people already diagnosed with it in Britain, and this number is likely to rise to 1.2 million in the next 10 years or so. And while this condition has always been present in society, the incidence of it and the rate which it is now spreading over the last years in particular has reached what we might call epidemic proportions. And this has taken all of us, particularly those people who have to live with it, their carers, completely by surprise. Wonderful people who previously played leading roles in their respective communities as readers, Eucharistic ministers, planning liturgies, cleaning, teaching, catechesis, financial work, and so on, have now been so affected by the effects of their dementia that carrying out these roles has been impossible, and in time they are reduced to a state in which they appear to recognize no one, not even their nearest and dearest. Now this is a huge frustration for them as they begin to lose hold on what they had once had control of, and then seemingly withdraw into themselves, into another world, where they've become relationally and socially isolated. And what is real for them has become different from what it means for other people around them. For those who love them most, this is the beginning of what my friend Maria Hunter calls a triple bereavement. First of all, the diagnosis of the condition and all that that might come to mean. Secondly, losing the person they once knew once their mind fails. And then maybe sometime later, actually losing them in death. Dementia is now frequently referred to as the long goodbye, and so indeed it is. And one of the things that's helped to bring the condition to our attention in the public much more in recent times is the number of well-known personalities who've actually developed the condition themselves. President Ronald Reagan, Terry Pratchett, Iris Murdoch, Terry Jones, Prunella Scales, or those who have written about or made TV programs about their relatives who've developed the condition. Sally Magnuson, Antonia Robinson about their mothers, David Baddiel about his father, and Michael Ignatieff about his mother. And we've also found that the condition has impacted directly on SPAND and our work, as many of our group members have Down syndrome, a condition that years ago would have meant that a person would not live beyond their 50th birthday. Now, with the advances in medical science, people with Down syndrome can live well into their 50s and 60s, but they are also developing illnesses and conditions associated with the aging process, including dementia. One of our parents in our Nottingham group, whose son, when over 50, seemed to be showing a lot of very similar signs to those of dementia, questioned this with the doctors, but the hospital still wanted to call it anxiety. His mother noticed the change in his handwriting, his speech, the loss of his brilliant memory for names and places initially, and latterly developing an involuntary spasm which involved the flicking of his right arm so that he could not eat food properly or put a cup down on a saucer. The condition worsened within 2 years, and Stephen died in September 2017. It was Stephen Peat who had played the lead role in the Dance of the Light, which you saw recently, and many other of our presentations, and he was a wonderfully kind and loving man. We all miss him so much and are anxious to maintain his legacy. So a whole new area of work and concern has been the result of this development. And since in SPAN, by virtue of our title, we try to address people's additional needs, there can hardly be any more additional needs or those of more urgency than this one. So we felt that we should at least make some attempt to discover the scale of the problem and suggest means of helping people who have dementia themselves or their carers, or maybe with other agencies such as the SVP, Eucharistic Ministry, to form a sort of umbrella under which the work that needs to be done in the diocese can be carried out. So that was the need for the publication in 2018, which aimed to identify the different stages of dementia, how they affect people, what was already being done, and what might yet be done to support them and their carers within both the Christian church and within society as a whole. It was not, nor ever could be, an exhaustive treatment on dementia. There are so many thoroughly excellent publications on the matter, which form the background to much of our reflection, and which are both learned and personal, providing detailed scientific research and positive suggestions. What we wanted to offer here was personal, spiritual, and pastoral. It was primarily about people, real people, their stories, joys, sorrows, and frustrations, and how we could help them through the stages of this difficult journey and support those who care for them, discovering the services that are available and precisely also who needs them. So what is dementia? Dementia is the generic name given to a variety of conditions, rather like cancer is a generic name given to various conditions. And this condition, dementia, has many different pathologies. And it's important that we realize that because each type of dementia presents itself in different ways, with consequent different challenges for the persons concerned and those looking after them. Dementia occurs when brain cells stop working properly or die, thus losing the connections between themselves which make the brain work and enable us to think. As a result of their loss, the entire brain functions less well, and this results in loss of memory, changes in personality, a reduced ability to do things, reduced understanding and ability to communicate. It is a progressive condition. With few exceptions, once it has started, it will progress and get worse. In an article in The Guardian in November 2016, the journalist Sarah Bosley described it thus: "Dementia now kills more people than cancer and heart attacks, according to the Office for National Statistics." We've all heard of them recently, haven't we? It will take hold of 1 of 3 people over 65 and cost the UK more than £26 billion a year. People with dementia lose the ability to care for themselves and can become malnourished, while their immune system weakens. Infections such as pneumonia may be the actual agent of death, but dementia is the underlying cause. There is no cure, and available drugs only delay the disease's progress. It is a cruel disease which takes away the person and their families whom they know and love, leaving a stranger who looks at them with confusion. The symptoms and effects vary according to the location of this breakdown and the type of cells involved. And according to Alzheimer's Research UK, there are many forms of dementia, which I will describe briefly here, but which can be accessed more fully in the book. So, some of the main forms of dementia are Alzheimer's disease, the most common form of dementia, caused by progressive death of cells in the brain and the buildup of proteins. Symptoms usually begin with mild memory difficulties. As it progresses, people struggle with orientation, problem solving, language and perception, and ultimately need help with daily tasks and self-care. In his book called Losing My Mind, written some years ago, Thomas de Baggio gives us an intimate look at his own life with Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's sends you back to an elemental world before time, a world that is devoid of possibility and secrets. It is a world of insecurity, fears, and frustration. You lose your sense of who you are and what the world is like, finding yourself a stranger both to yourself and to the world. Dementia is a series of small deaths that strips the peace from this previously hopeful life, casting a person adrift in a world that is rapidly vanishing. The second common form is vascular dementia. This occurs when the blood flow to the brain becomes reduced, often after a patient has suffered a stroke or several small strokes, or indeed has prolonged association with alcohol. With this condition, it is possible that treatment with blood thinning and blood pressure medicines, as well as cholesterol-lowering medicines, may make a difference and slow progression, preserving health for at least a little longer. Lesser known, dementia with Lewy bodies, DLB. Between 10 and 15% of people with dementia have DLB. Lewy bodies are clumps of a protein that build up in the brain cells and damage them, and the symptoms of DLB overlap with those of Alzheimer's, but include visual hallucinations, problems with alertness, sleep disturbances, such as acting out dreams. Frontotemporal dementia, FTD, affects tens of thousands of people in the UK, but remains a relatively little-known medical problem for which there is no cure or specific treatment. Loss of language remains its most notable symptom, as also a decrease in sympathy for others, but mobility is not affected. FTD most commonly affects people in their 50s and 60s, but can originate as early as their 30s and is under-recognized in older adults. And finally, posterior cortical atrophy, PCA. This variant involves not just remembering things, but also spatial awareness, disorientation, visual illusions, and problems making your movement coincide with your perception of space. It is quite common, for example, if a person has moved into a residential establishment, to lose things like their handbags and then accuse other people of stealing it or their wallet. Sir Terry Pratchett wrote, "There isn't one kind of dementia, there aren't a dozen kinds. There are hundreds of thousands. Each person who lives with one of these diseases will be affected in a uniquely destructive way. There is no clearly plotted pathway to the course of these diseases. Dementia attacks those facets which make us who we are, and it's a deeply personal attack that defies prediction, and that's the point. Every person with dementia has a unique story to tell, and words need to be put down before they run dry or run out." So Still the Same People was not a title chosen accidentally for the publication. A person who develops and has to live with dementia is still the person they always were. And we, in accompanying them on their journey, as Pope Francis often puts it, always need to remember that and treat them accordingly, while at the same time becoming ever more conscious of their changing needs, as well as the needs and sufferings of those who look after them. It was our hope that this publication would make a small contribution to bringing this about, to raise awareness even more and stimulate faithful and sensitive care for those who need it most at this time. The old age psychiatrist Dr. Adrian Treloar wrote, "Dementia can indeed be a difficult journey. Accompanying someone on the journey can also be terribly hard, but it is a journey which requires the care and support of many, including the churches and their faithful. There is much to do. Churches have a duty to support people with dementia and their carers, and they must be sure to deliver on that duty of care and support. The churches have plenty to learn, for with better understanding of dementia, more can be done. The parable of the Good Samaritan, he says, does not get much closer to reality than it does with dementia." Now, we in SPAN have noticed a remarkable similarity in the problems experienced by our dear friends and their families all those years ago who had children with disabling conditions, and what has emerged in the situation of those with dementia and their carers today. You might make the connection yourselves as I describe them to you. The features that we noticed then for such people and their families were, first of all, people with disabling conditions were not taken seriously as persons who had responsibilities, rights and choices to make of their own. They were often seen rather as burdens on their families and a drain on society, disadvantaged and making no significant social or economic contribution to our lives. Secondly, they were often stigmatized and spoken down to, as if they had no intelligence or abilities. In those days, the word spastic or Mongol was often used as an insult. Furthermore, these people were to be avoided at all costs in case their condition might be catching. And thirdly, they were often thence hidden away by their parents and isolated from church and society for fear of embarrassment or ridicule. Their parents would often feel guilty about having a child with a disabling condition born into their family. What have we done to deserve this? They would ask themselves this question as if their child was some sort of punishment. They might even be angry with God for the misfortune that had befallen them, but at the same time came to be very possessive of the child they had to care for. This could then develop into something of a huge overprotective attitude, whereby they would not trust any other person, professional or volunteer, with the care of their children, because they believed that they themselves were the only people who really knew how to look after them. There was also overcompensation. In this scenario, parents would often speak for their children, make decisions and choices for them, thus preventing them from developing into persons with choices themselves. And then we noticed sometimes in what we used to call the scapegoat syndrome. The child was blamed for the lack of opportunities families had to do normal things that they did. Or, well, we could do that if we didn't have our Johnny. However, this was often a way of hiding behind the child and their difficulties if the parents had problems themselves or did not want to do these things anyway. The parents or carers, while struggling to look after them, were anxious to have some sort of respite, even if only for a few hours, but at the same time not willing to let go of the person into the care of others, as they felt that he or she was their responsibility. And of course, in most cases, the condition of the child was incurable. It was not ever going to improve, but if anything, worsen or deteriorate. So the burden was about how to live with it and how to cope with someone living with it. The Catholic Church in particular was ignorant of and unsympathetic to the nuances of this situation. Pilgrimages to Lourdes were often seen as ways in which the child's condition might be cured, but there was no difficulty in raising money to sponsor children for these trips, because as many people would unthinkingly say, at least my children are healthy. And finally, children and people with disabling conditions were perceived as needing to be helped because they were disadvantaged, And many people were quick to identify themselves as helpers of the handicapped in what became a very patronising them and us syndrome. And many of those features, of course, could also have been applied to adults with physical disabilities, particularly when their disability had occurred as a result of an accident or illness and they had lost the life they had before. The amazing thing, though, is that you could transfer many of these observations almost exactly to the situation of people living with dementia today and their carers, who have in fact also lost the life they had before. It is quite uncanny. There is certainly a stigma attached to dementia, to people who develop it and those who care for them, which expresses itself in our language. How often have you heard yourself saying, "It nearly drove me demented," meaning mad? How often have we spoken of losing our minds in a negative way? Consequently, people are loath to admit its symptoms too early for fear of being isolated or branded. Many people living with dementia find themselves rather quickly being abandoned by their former friends and even family because they don't know what to say to them or how to deal with them anymore. As a consequence, they can then become more isolated from church or society because of embarrassment or fear of ridicule. Their carers, having to cope with the gradual losing of the person they love, can then find themselves becoming somewhat overprotective and not trusting of anyone else to look after that person they love because they feel that it is their personal responsibility. They may also overcompensate for them, answering questions for them, when they do not seem to be able to speak for themselves, making decisions for them, when with a little patience the choices should still be their own. And this is very wearing. They find themselves becoming exhausted and longing for some sort of respite, but being ashamed of asking for it or fearful of the effect it will have on the person they're caring for. They may even in their darkest moments find themselves blaming the person they look after for the loss of the life, freedom and opportunities they once had by contracting this condition, and thus bringing upon the family all sorts of new limitations, difficulties and sufferings. And of course, the condition is incurable. It is not going to improve, but only get worse. This is the hardest thing to come to terms with, despite the fact that research is continuing to reduce the rapid advance of the condition. It cannot be ultimately cured, but may possibly be delayed. And so then, to support a person living with dementia and their carers demands great sensitivity to these issues and so many more, and the ability to listen to them and understand them, as Dr. Adrian Treloar points out. It is very definitely not enough just to be nice, caring and comforting to people with dementia. As well as that, we have to understand that the difficulties and behaviours that we see are fundamentally caused by that illness. It helps us to remember that this is an illness and does not reflect the way that a person would have wanted to behave when they were well and younger. Treatments are also needed to alleviate the symptoms and distress of what is a major brain illness. At least in part, we have to respond to dementia with treatments and care in the same way that we would respond to any other physical illness. He goes on to say, being a carer is one of the hardest things that many people ever do. It can be mentally exhausting as well as a huge organisational challenge. Carers often find the behaviours of people with dementia very hard to understand and reconcile. It is very important to emphasise to carers that behaviours are caused by the illness and not by the person. And many people do indeed hope that the care they provide for someone with dementia is a testament to their marriage vows, to the great gifts they've received from the person who now needs their care. That last statement is absolutely true. I've heard it myself many times from an elderly person caring for their partner who's developed dementia. What else can I do? This is what I got married for. This is most humbling to see, as it is the devotion of one person to their life partner in old age. And it's happened to me countless times here in the last few years. Next week, we will think a little more about what happens to people living with dementia and their carers, and how we might support them in the different stages of the development of that condition.